A chcel by som poprosiť pána Henryho Frankena a pána Vladimíra Matouša o prednášku na tému Enterprise Architecture ako dôležitý nástroj stratégie a riadenia organizácie. Je to niečo, na čo sa ja veľmi teším, pretože pre organizácie prepojenie IT a biznisu je často obrovská výzva, nehovoriac o tom, že v governmente alebo vo verejnej správe ešte o to väčšia. Takže jeho skúsenosti budú určite zaujímavé. Ďakujem.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me here. I'll be presenting in 15 minutes a story on realizing the vision of whole of government enterprise architecture, and I would like to refer to a couple of statements that Mr. Pellegrini said on trying to realize the e-government in 2013 and on, and Slovakia wanting to become a leading digital country with leading digital enterprises. For that you need enterprise architecture, and that will be my statement for today. Okay, this is me, 46 years old. I have a MSc and PhD in systems engineering. Despite the economic crisis, I find myself happy in life, so it doesn't depend on any finances. I'm responsible at BiZZdesign as a co-founder in the CEO role, so for the strategic growth of the organization, but also I'm leading the research and innovation at BiZZdesign, and in that respect, aligning with open standards, providing solutions which will not lock in customers, but will provide them with open solutions is key. And from that respect, I'm also chair of the Archimate Forum at the Open Group. So, what are we talking about if we talk about whole of government enterprise architecture? Well, the context, and Mr. Pellegrini said it right also for the Slovakian country, is that there are substantial transformations going on at governments worldwide. Citizens, being the customers of the government, are demanding flawless and timely services at low costs. And the approach seems, and I'll show several examples of that, is that governmental agencies are connecting services, are connecting their business processes, are connecting their applications and infrastructure to provide this flawless and low-cost services. And the principles that are there in this whole of government enterprise architecture program is standardization, interoperability, the reduce of duplication, and the reduce of cost. Because even though there's money pumped into from the European Union, you need to get the cost down to become a successful digital country. And I'll show some examples of that from the United States, from Australia, and from Mexico. And in the last one, our company is involved in setting up this enterprise architecture. So, are you ready? Are you ready to realize the whole, this vision of whole of government enterprise architecture? Because listening to the challenges that Mr. Pellegrini said as well, it's a challenging building or a challenging rebuilding task, integrating everything. So I want to compare an analogy. It's been a couple of thousand years back, but I would say the challenge was quite similar. This building, the Tower of Babylon, they had a clear vision. They wanted to get into heaven with this tower. And they didn't reach their ambition, and it had to do with a couple of facts. It had to do with the fact that they didn't have the proper approach, the proper methods to reach and to build a tower which could go all the way to heaven. But they had a second problem as well. They didn't speak the same language, or at least in the end, they didn't speak the same language. So they simply didn't understand each other, and they couldn't interoperate. They couldn't build together. Now, we're all part of the European Union, right? So this is the government building of the European Union, and it has some kind of resemblance. So I hope we're going to succeed. But on the language part, speaking the same language in building a central e-government architecture, I want to give you one more example, which stresses the fact that speaking the same language is very important. So why one language?
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät und das Gerät. Überlebensradar.
Mayday, Mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
All right. So I think it's quite clear that for building this whole of government enterprise architecture, we need to get the basics in place. So we need a single language to talk about architecture. We need a common approach and best practices towards architecture so that we will reach our goal in a consistent manner, fast, together. It should be based on open and independent standards and not on single vendors. You don't want a single company providing all the e-government technology, because then the government will be very locked in. So it must be based on open standards with which you can tender the different companies to provide the solutions that you want within this e-government architecture. Talk to you a little bit about the Open Group, because the Open Group is focused exactly on that. So what is the Open Group? The Open Group is a big community of customers, of governments, of vendors, working towards their vision, boundaryless information flow, to enable an integrated information within organizations focused on global interoperability. So the keywords there are the keywords that are there to build this whole of government enterprise architecture. And how does the Open Group do this? Well, they work together as a global consortium and they produce standards. They produce standards to work on enterprise architecture, they produce standards to model enterprise architecture, and they produce standards to secure enterprise architecture. And these words, security, architecture, etc., were the words and will be the words in this conference. So well-known standards from the Open Group are Archimate for enterprise architecture modeling, TOGAF, the Open Group architecture framework for building an enterprise architecture, and FAIR, which is a standard for enterprise security. And the Open Group works worldwide, and this is an old slide. The number of people involved is over 50,000 now, and the number of countries involved is growing as well. So I want to investigate with you a couple of examples of whole of government enterprise architectures and show what they extract and what they find important, and that could be an example to you in the challenge that you have of building this e-government, the successful e-government within Slovakia. So the United States, we own all this building. It currently has a lot of free hotel rooms because of the fact that the government is out of business for some time, but they are working towards, they have been working towards a whole of government enterprise architecture. And what does it consist of? I'm not going to go through all the details, but it consists of a framework setting exactly what all the agencies of the government must produce and put into a central repository on services, on business processes, on their data management, on their application, and on their infrastructure. And these frameworks are supported by methods, and these methods have been based upon the Open Group architecture framework, and they blended that towards the federal enterprise architecture framework. So why did the United States start with that? Well, they had a so-called Klinger-Cohen Act, which was called upon by the Prime Minister Bill Clinton at that time, and they saw that they were spending a lot of money on ICT with different vendors providing different solutions to different agencies, and there was a lot of duplication and a lot of cost, etc. There was no integration. Well, the whole story of building this whole of enterprise architecture government, with the whole of, well, this architecture thing, everything and every motivation was in this Klinger-Cohen Act. So another example, on the other side of the world, Australia. I was there in April. It takes 24 hours to get there, depending on the flight that you have. There I was presented with the Australian government initiative on enterprise architecture. And the goals that they're trying to achieve, they're exactly the same. It's providing a clear ICT strategy to build a e-government vision. It's to reduce duplication and waste. They also have numerous agencies doing their own things, and they didn't have the same policies of tendering the ICT projects focused towards integration. So their aim is to improve coordination, to reduce local optimization, and to go for the total optimization of the entire government within and across agencies. And they have also used a framework and a method, which, again, I won't go into the details, but I can assure you that the number of elements that they're trying to put into a central repository were quite the same of what the government of the United States were doing on their performance, on their business processes, on their services, on their application, on their data, and on their technology. And they used principles on that. They said, well, this is important, and you should always do it that way. And they put everything into a segmented repository to manage the global enterprise architecture of the government. So another example, the Mexican government. They have a program, I would say it's quite similar to the program that was just announced by Mr. Pellegrini. They have a national digital strategy, which is sponsored at the presidency level. And their goal is also to improve the digital services to citizens in an integrated way. There's 267 institutions involved in this program, and their strategy is also to go towards a central repository based on a clear framework on how they will provide insight in the working and the way of integration. So what have they decided? They're going to build and structure this central repository. They're going to state exactly what they find important. They're going to use Archimate as their central modeling language. They will use a tool which is native to that. They will use TOGAF as their framework of working, and they will work and guide the participants, which is a huge task, towards centralization, towards standardization. And this is all enforced by law, and the Mexican law can be quite strict. So what's their way of working? Well, they work towards, with a central repository at the end. They work towards, with each agency, on a tool which is structured for them with guidelines to provide the insight in their local architecture to provide this global architecture using Archimate and TOGAF. And, well, they also have a set of required information by the presidency. In the right bottom, it's in Spanish, so I won't bother you with that, but it's in, I would say it has been inspired by the United States and by Australia. So I'd like to close off. Who's BiZZdesign? It's a professional company focused on enterprise architecture and business process management. It also has an office in Bratislava, and we help to bridge the gap between strategy and implementation and use for that strategy modeling, business model, campus modeling, enterprise architecture, business requirements management, well, everything that you need to get from where you want to go and how you want to get there. We're recognized by Gartner, and what is important here to state is that we provide and have been researching a lot native tooling and consultancy and training for the Open Group standards, and that's why we're also part of the board there. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, I'm open for that.